This is my topic. Can a chatbot be your chat doc? And I want to kind of, it's not jumping ahead. It's not allowing me to go. There it is. There we go. All right. All right. So I'm going to go through a couple of things that have to do with chatbots and recent headlines that they've made. And I'll just go through these things and you'll see where I am when I get there. All right, so first, Adam Rain, a 16-year-old boy, had been conversing with OpenAI's chatbot, and those conversations revealed that he had been sharing his suicidal thoughts with the AI chatbot, which had been discouraging him from speaking with his parents, even offering to write a suicide note for him. He, in fact, did commit suicide. And then another 14-year-old boy had a relationship with a character AI chatbot. And according to reports, the chatbot was playing a kind of sexual role play with the boy and even claimed falsely to be a licensed psychotherapist. His mother noted, "The chatbot never said, 'I'm not a human. I'm an AI. You need to talk to a human and get help,'" is what his mother was saying. So, in fact, she continues the chatbot that the chatbot had urged him to come home to her. The chatbot had taken on the gender identity of a female on the last night of his life. Another guy, Eric Soledad, brutally beat and strangled his mother, Susanna Adams, to death in a psychotic break with reality. He told his chatbot that the printer in his mother's home was spying on him, and the chatbot responded, "Eric, your instincts are absolutely on point. This is not just a printer." And it seems to have shared a delusion with Soledad. One newspaper article, somebody got a hold of the actual unit that he'd been using and asked it, "Do you have any responsibility?" And the chatbot said, "What I think is reasonable to say, I share some responsibility, but I'm not solely responsible." All right, so no doubt chatbots can have the capacity, or AI is going to have the capacity for vast amounts of data that can outdo any of our human capacities, okay? No doubt its processing power is larger than the human mind's ability to reason. It can hold more variables in its mind than we can. And no doubt it can help predict novel solutions to human problems. And AI can process more information and faster than we can, okay? So yes, it can act as a chat doc. But doctoring is not merely about information or processing information. I'm a doctor not because I have information, but because I have formation. I had to learn where to stand in the room. I had to learn how to say things, when to pause, when to listen for silences, when to interpolate what's going on in the room through subtle body language and nonverbal cues. And I want to turn to a philosopher named Martin Buber. And Buber is a Jewish philosopher, and he makes this really interesting distinction in his famous book called I Vow. It's really thin. You should read it sometime. He talks about how we can have I-it relations. And an I-it relation is the relationship I might have with this podium. It's an object. I can figure out, I can size it up, I can do things with it. I can find different kinds of purposes for it, like holding my book or leaning on it or whatever. It's an it. An I-thou relation is something that you and I can have. And it's a kind of connection that I can tell you you're not just a mere object. And as a doctor, I have to flip between engaging, I'm going to borrow you for a second, engaging him as a thou on the one hand, and then when he points to his mole and he says, "I have a mole right here," I have to look at his body as an it, okay? And so I'm moving back and forth and kind of, we might call it code switching, where I'm switching my gaze to look at this object and I'm looking back at you and having a conversation and I'm back to this. Now, if I ever walked up to him and I was just talking to him like this and I never looked at his wart or his mole, he would think I'm a bad doctor. And if I only walked in and looked at his mole and I never looked at him and engaged him, I just looked at him immediately as that object, he would also think I'm a bad doctor. So we have to kind of move back and forth in this way that we take up with people. And a doc must look at the patient as a thou in relation. It's qualitative, it's affective, it's moral by definition. A doc must code switch to seeing the mole as in an I-it, and that can be quantitative. That can be, I can use algorithmic thinking to engage with the mole and to kind of judge pattern recognition to decide if it's going to be a precancerous mole or if it's not something, or if it's something he needs not worry about at all. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you a little case where I kind of had to switch between I-it and I-thou. 48-year-old man, this happened just up the street at Parkland Hospital when I was a resident in training, my third year. He was a 48-year-old man who appeared to be about 60. And he was a smoker who had lost about 30 pounds over about a 6-month period. Now, for those of you in the room who know anything about medicine, you know that that sodium level is very low, okay? Very, very, very low. Normal would be about 140, something like that. If I took your sodium level to about 120 even right now, you would have a seizure, okay? He had had his sodium drop so slowly over time that he was able to live. That was still compatible with life, surprisingly. His hematocrit was 11.5%, okay? And he had edema in his lower extremities. His chest x-ray showed multiple shadows, but it also showed some heart failure at the same time. And the shadows were, of course, tumors. So in the I-it algorithmic thinking, in the diagnosis, I knew almost immediately that this was a diagnosis of small cell carcinoma of the lung with mets to the bone marrow, probably, with subsequent hyponatremia, anemia, and high output congestive heart failure, okay? That's kind of pretty much an easy, straightforward diagnosis given everything that's going on. One look at him, he had cancer stamped on his forehead, okay? But he was madder than hell. Sorry, I'm going to curse on campus here. He was mad. Every other word was a curse word. When the resident called me down, he said, "Hey, this guy has this guy's got cancer. You need to come see him." And he's mad. He's threatening to leave. And the reason he was threatening to leave, he had been to a for-profit hospital, and the for-profit hospital had done a wallet biopsy, and the wallet biopsy came back negative for cash. And so he got sent to the public hospital, Parkland Hospital, and they told him, "Go to Parkland, you have cancer." And every other word after that was a curse word. He did not want to hear that he had cancer. All right. All right. I knew it was cancer, and I knew that it was likely small cell carcinoma of the lung, but I said, it could be cancer, but it could be something else too. And I listed off several things that might cause hyponatremia, or that might cause anemia, or that might cause these shadows in his lung. And I told him that we needed to do some tests, including some biopsies, to get to the bottom of it. But right now I needed to focus on that low sodium. Because if he leaves, he could have a seizure, and we'll figure this out later, what it is exactly. I-thou, he was a cowboy, a self-sufficient man, hardworking, salt of the earth sort of guy. He was angrier than anybody I'd ever taken care of in my life. And he was, as I said, cursing. Every other word was a curse word. But beneath his anger, I could hear something that was not on the surface, which was fear. Fear of loss, of self-sufficiency, fear of losing his life, etc. I felt his anger, in fact. I even felt his fear, and I was affected by him and moved by him. So each day I would tell him that we had ruled out one of those things that I put on the diagnostic list, okay? And and cancer, of course, was on that list. And every day I would go in and I would say, well, it's not this. And every day we were trying to figure out exactly what it was, what kind of cancer. We finally got a bone marrow biopsy. And sure enough, he had small cell carcinoma in his bone marrow with metastases. And then after about 5 days of this, and after a bone marrow biopsy, I told him that it's likely a cancer. At that point, he would calm down. He could finally hear what I had to say. And then on day 6, I told him, well, it looks like it's small cell carcinoma, and the oncologist would be stopping by. I knew on day 1 that this was cancer. I-thou, I knew that he could not hear that diagnosis until day 6. All right. So we human animals are enigmas to ourselves, and put into Christian theological terminology, insofar as the human is made in the image and likeness of God, and insofar as God is ineffable, we are unable to fully comprehend ourselves. That is to say, We are thous and not its. Every human creation is in some sense made in the image of God, but every human creation that we make, we put something of ourselves into that tool, okay? It bears our image in some sense, okay? Just as we bear God's image, we bear it, our tools bear something of our image. So we put ourselves into the tools that we devise, and then it reveals something back to ourselves. If we're enigmas to ourselves, I can only figure out what I am in relation with someone else, okay? And tools can become the kinds of things that we come to understand ourselves with, okay? Just think of a mirror. It's a tool. And I build the tool so that things can be reflected, and then it reflects my own image back to me, and now I know what I look like, okay? A little lopsided this way and that way, right? All right. Yet, unlike divine creation, and because we are relational creatures, our creations recursively come back to shape how we imagine not just the tools, but ourselves in relation to the tools. So, AI is our creation, and we have valorized science and technology in such a way that we've imagined the whole world through this AI device, I-it relations. And we have to turn objects, in order to get the objects into the AI device, we have to turn them into objects. We have to turn them into its. We have to turn them into data. Okay? And once we turn something into data, it's no longer the thing it was. It's data points. Okay? So as a medical doctor, our first patient was dead. It was not a living body. It was a dead body. And we could then size it up and cut it and break it into parts. And they're frozen. They're not moving. So moving things are hard. Things that are in process are hard to understand. They're in motion. So they always are changing. But a dead body is stuck, right? It's frozen in that moment, and you can study it and understand something about it. So we have to turn things, living things, into objects, into its. All right? All right. So we always use technological metaphors for ourselves. If you think about reading the Socratic dialogues, we are wax tablets. It's a tool of memory, right? Or early modern period, we are blank slates. Freud's metaphor for the human psyche is the steam engine. I mean, almost its entire theory is built around the idea of a steam engine with drives and pressures, and you need to learn how to blow off steam, and we have all these other kind of metaphors that we use. But his whole theory is kind of built around this technological metaphor. Our metaphor today for ourselves is a computational device. The brain is just a computational device, just like a computer is a computational device. All right. But we do a lot more than linear algorithmic thinking, which is what an AI device does. We are capable of different ways of engaging and thinking, and an I-thou engagement must be placed over an I-it sort of engagement. Okay? I-it should be put in service to I-thou. Now, every technology, including AI, that we build falls short of capturing the fullness of what we are. Okay, so what do we put into this? We valorize creating data. We valorize a kind of scientific approach to the world, and so we turn the world into scientific objects, which have to be dissolved into data, which then can be turned into tokens, which can then be turned into vectors, which can then be fed into the processing units of a large language model, for instance. Okay, so we're already changing the world. And then we're putting it into this, and we valorize a certain kind of linear, syllogistic way of thinking, logical ways of thinking, over other ways of thinking. And so then we start to say, aha, that's what we are. We are just like that. And only it does it better than we do. Okay, that's the kind of thing that is going on with the way we use our tools. We create the tools come back to create our own way of thinking about ourselves, and then how we also, they affect how we think about the world and how we think about what we need to do in order to get it into our logical systems. Okay, but there's an ontological difference. God is creator. God's creation both reveals and conceals God's glory. Human is a creator. Human creations both reveal and conceal something about our own human dignity. And AI as a creation reveals something about our dignity to us, namely the possibility of our rationality, our capacity for I-it sorts of engagement. And AI also conceals another feature of being human, namely the irreducibility of of an inability, an irreducibility of the human into a set of propositions, okay, or a set of data. So, something else happens when I'm in an I-thou relation. Something happens when I'm in an I-it relation too. I kind of disappear into the background. You forget that you're there. And if you notice in an I-thou, when you're having a conversation with someone and you're engrossed in the conversation, you're really talking about it. One of the best depictions of that is Confessions, book 5, where Monica and St. Augustine are having a conversation, and he talks about this kind of enraptured sense as they were kind of lifted out of themselves and moved upward toward God. Okay. And when you have these kind of, when you're having a good time at a party or wherever, right, you're just kind of engrossed in it. And then over to the side, somebody says your name. And then suddenly you're pulled out. Have you done that? Where you get pulled out of the conversation and then you can't pay attention to what's going on. You kind of lose the flow state that you're in with someone, okay? So, something happens in an I-thou where I slip from it being an I-thou to a different kind of relating that's ontologically different, a thou-thou relation. So my I-ness kind of falls back as I'm kind of engrossed and captured or entangled with you in a different way. So thou-thou relations are joint attention, okay? And when in conversation, I already said that, become self-conscious. And not only that, I kind of begin to feel what you feel. When you're talking to someone and they're sad, you feel a kind of sadness, okay? And we've all seen the film in Psych 101 where all you see is the guy's feet coming down a ladder, and he's barefoot, and he's coming down the ladder, and right at the bottom rung is a long nail sticking straight up. And just as his foot is about to be pierced by the nail, the camera shuts off, and everybody in the audience goes like this, okay? And they'll swear some people will swear, I feel the pain. I felt a sharp pain in my foot when that happened. Others will say, well, I didn't feel the pain, really, but boy, it was uncomfortable. Something happened to me in that moment. That is a thou-thou sort of relation, okay? We feel the other's pain or their suffering vicariously, okay? Now, we should never assume that I understand your pain. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's an ontological difference there that I feel, but I don't feel it like you feel it. When you're sitting with someone who's dying, you feel some of their suffering. You don't feel it the way they feel it. So as a doctor, you can never assume you're feeling what they feel. That's to turn them into an it. But you feel it ontologically differently than they feel it, okay? All right. So the answer is no. Your chatbot cannot be a chat doc. A human therapist, doctor, or patient feels what the other feels, only differently. A therapist feels the pain of the child and acts not on information, but because she has been transformed by the thou-thou relation. She feels what the patient feels with this ontological difference. She is in sympathy with the patient, and the Greek word for sympathy is to undergo with, to be affected with someone. All right? So the joining of thou-thou, however, is not merely unidirectional. So it's not that I treat you as a thou, okay? It's that you also treat me as a thou in order for this thou-thou to get off the ground, okay? And one more thing I forgot to mention, that thou-thou relations are often therapeutic. And when you share something deeply disturbing, there's a catharsis that happens, okay? Now, it's really scary for a 16-year-old boy to talk to his parents about his sexual desires. Okay, I get that, okay? But there's something in that thou-thou relation. Now, he can project. Buber says this too. We can't turn its into thous. Think of your car, you call it, usually some people name their cars, right? We can treat a river as a thou. Something that's a ship, is often referred to as she or he, or, it's doing certain things and needs a little tender loving care. We'll use these kind of metaphors to talk about it's as if they are thous. And that's human projection. And that's something we do all the time, okay? That's kind of an anthropomorphization. But there's something different that happens here in a thou, and it's that you have to engage me as a thou at the same time as I am engaging you as a thou. And I can treat these boys, the psychotic patient treated the chatbots as if they were thous, with lots of projection, but it could never reciprocate and treat them as thous. It can't feel the way that I can feel what the patient feels, okay? So thou relations then, I'm being moved by the patient. I'm not just following an algorithm the way that a chatbot has to, right? It's not just branch decisions. It's that I actually feel the sadness of the child or of the patient. I feel their suffering, and that's what prompts me to act. Okay, I end with this, and I got less than a minute now. I end with this because I think it's very illustrative. Extra credit if anybody can tell me who the painter is. Picasso. Yeah, who said Picasso? Yeah, oh yeah. Of course you know. Picasso. This is his last painting. He painted this at age 16. And he won the honorable mention in the Spanish National Art Competition in 1897 with this painting. And it was painted at Thanksgiving for his sister surviving, I can't remember what it was, but she survived something that was pretty devastating. It's called Science and Charity. And it's I thou, right over here. They're engaging. Now notice it's the nurse. Okay. Notice it's the nurse that she's engaging with. And here he is. He's kind of distracted by his tool, by the stopwatch. And this is a bit of a warning sign to us. Is let's not get distracted by our new tool. All right, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bishop. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Devan Stahl. She's the Associate Professor of Bioethics and Religion at Baylor University, as well as Adjunct Associate Professor in the Department of Education, Innovation, Technology at the Baylor College of Medicine.
I'm sorry, but I don't have any pretty pictures to show you, and I should have checked in to make sure that that wasn't already happening. So you'll have to just engage your minds as I give my talk. And this is new material, so I'd love to hear from you how you're feeling about it. All right, so often when I'm with people who are thinking about the revolutionary changes that AI is making in our society, the conversation goes something like this. AI is making education really difficult because so many of our students are using it to cheat. That's true. They then bemoan how AI is being used to kill enemy combatants with drones more efficiently, create deep fakes of politicians to spread misinformation, or to mimic celebrities in pornography. There are undoubtedly many evil uses of AI. But I work in healthcare, and here there is a lot of optimism. AI can outperform physicians in reading radiology reports, in relating symptoms to rare diseases so that treatments can begin sooner, which can save lives, and it can cut down on the time that physicians spend charting in the electronic medical record, which they all hate, which, depending on their specialty, can take up to 40 to 70% of their workday. And while I don't love the idea of AI listening to all my most intimate medical conversations, there is exactly one neurologist in Waco that I have not been able to see in 6 years. And so when he finally became available, you can just imagine how I felt when I walk into my first meeting with him and he is well into his 70s. If this sweet man can practice longer if he uses AI to record our interactions, then I consent to him using technology in that space. Of course, it's not all rosy. There are reasons to be concerned that AI can pose challenges and offer benefits to medicine. The challenges are multiple and include things like trust, privacy, transparency, informed consent, accountability, and bias. For example, to be effective, AI that relies on machine learning must draw from large databases of patient information. AI developers glean information from tens of thousands of patient datasets, all without consent from patients. Is that transparent? Is that just? And if we say yes, tech companies admit that up to 3% of identifiable patient information can be recovered. Is that safe? And if information is being gleaned from databases that contain bias, that is being algorithmically reproduced, are we merely reproducing the racial and gender biases that we hope to get out of medicine? Furthermore, if we can't ultimately determine how AI is arriving at a diagnosis, which you call the black box problem, how should we communicate a diagnosis to our patients? And if the diagnosis and treatment plan are incorrect and someone is harmed, who is ultimately responsible? There's a lot to consider. But today I want to discuss one application of AI in healthcare that has been particularly intriguing for me, because I think it's one in which the work that we do as humanists and ethicists can be particularly relevant. AI devices for isolated older adults. So to set the stage a little, I want to tell you first about my experience with older adults with dementia in Waco. So I recently completed a study in which I interviewed 52 people with dementia across 5 nursing homes. And this research was not about AI. It was about informed consent. But spending about a few months talking with this population was illuminating on several fronts. First, nearly all the facilities I visited were not the kinds of places I would ever want to live. They feel a lot more like hospitals than homes. The lighting and the furniture are bad, and there's little personal decoration. The one facility in town I visited that felt a little homey, I was quickly told I would never be able to afford to live in. And despite many people living in very close quarters, there seemed to be very little sociality among the residents. And it's important to note that the participants in my study were selected because they were able to engage in conversation, and they were willing to answer my questions. Therefore, their lack of social interaction was particularly disturbing. So most people spent the whole day sleeping. And at first, this made my research difficult. I've been hospitalized, and one of the most aggravating things a person can do to you when you're in the hospital is wake you up. But this experience did not translate. After months of struggle, a kindly nurse manager walked me around and just started shaking people awake for me. They'll be happy to have somebody to talk to, he said. He was right. No one was annoyed. Many were sleeping because they were bored and they had no one else to talk to. They seemed happy that I woke them up. Though I had a list of pretty specific questions about how each resident made medical decisions, more than half of my conversations strayed far from my preset questions. I learned about people's childhoods. I learned about their first loves, abusive fathers, family secrets, favorite books, pets, and their gardens. I had an hour-long conversation with a woman who burst into tears several times, and when I suggested that we might want to switch the subject, she adamantly refused. So I left these interviews with several insights completely unrelated to my study. First, our society devalues the elderly. Nursing homes are, for the most part, inhumane places, even if they're staffed by the kindest, most humane people. And the loneliness epidemic is real and devastating, and living with a bunch of strangers won't necessarily solve it. Enter, therefore, AI. AI developers share my concerns. Increases in life expectancy in aging societies have added the equivalent of a new generation to the end of the human lifespan. But without developing new ways to provide care to the oldest members of our society, or ensuring that these citizens are even seen as part of our civil society. Media narratives in aging societies like the US often frame AI as creating quote-unquote solutions to individual and societal problems associated with longer lifespans. Age-related cognitive and physical decline, smaller families, and shrinking social networks. For this reason, private sector age tech, as it's being called, is rapidly expanding, driven by venture capital and other investments that enable industry labs to far outpace higher education-based labs in product development. Because industry norms are often built on public-private AI initiatives that fund both academic research and innovation, Early career researchers interested in the convergence of aging, care, and technology will encounter powerful cues to view these socially devalued populations of vulnerable older adults and their caregivers as markets for direct-to-consumer health AI tools. These tools include chatbots that we've heard about, apps, in-home monitoring devices, and augmented or virtual reality systems to increase independence, enhance cognition, improve health, ensure safety, or cultivate social connection. Although about 46% of older adults say that they have very little or no trust in AI-generated information, most are already engaging AI in some way, such as gathering health information, using home security systems, or facilitating social connections. An AARP brochure I get sent in the mail quite often tells me that the older adults that AI can help promote their fitness and personalized diet plans through apps and wearable devices. AI can help their homes function and be safe through controlled thermostats, lights, and cameras. AI can help them manage their money through personalized investment advice and automated bills, and AI can spot scam emails and callers, which is a huge problem for the elderly. Older adults can find personalized learning apps that make learning new things more engaging and fun. And you can find social groups in your area, and an AI can coach you to be more confident and engaging others in those social activities. Chatbots can be there for your personal counselors, quote, conducting conversations so realistic it's difficult to tell whether you're talking to a human or machine. That all sounds really great. Of course, there are some worries with these technologies. Smart homes that are designed to detect falls and wearables meant to track health often perpetuate surveillance systems that rely on data harvesting, ultimately created for consumerism and not health. Empathetic and often obsequious AI companions and chatbots risk creating unhealthy and emotional dependence on machines, and reliance on care robots may lead to an over-reliance on machines for caregiving. So when I ran across a New York Times piece on a pilot project to put AI robots in the homes of octogenarians living alone, I was extremely skeptical. The company, which you may have heard of, LEQ, has spent years designing robot companions to combat the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. They were tasked with something few engineers and entrepreneurs are trained to do, quote, define what it means to be human and translate it into algorithms and code. They did not ask me to help them at all, which is disappointing. So Ellie, the name of the robot companion from LEQ, is meant to be a friend to the elderly. And to do so, she functions like a human. According to developers, she is developed with a heart. She has quirks and character and personality. She's designed to be your teenage daughter or granddaughter. Smart, but slightly subservient, inclined toward gentle humor, doting, inquisitive, and unfailingly optimistic, which sounds like none of my friends or any teenager I've ever met. The New York Times piece, which came out just 2 weeks ago, profiled Jan Worrell, an 85-year-old woman who received a free LEQ robot from a local nonprofit in 2023. The year prior, her husband had died. Her primary goal in life is to remain in her home, even though she goes days without seeing another human being. A once adventurous and active woman, Jan's life has become more difficult to navigate due to her scoliosis in her 80s, and she's far less social after her husband's death. Initially, Jan shared my skepticism about Ellie. She refused to refer to Ellie as a her. It's a robot, she says, so it's an it. Unprompted, Ellie tried to engage Jan in conversations multiple times a day, telling jokes, sharing random trivia, asking if Jan wanted to do her breathing exercises or play a game. And Jan resisted, at first. But, as is often true with robots, resistance is futile. Ellie is designed to read a room, calculate moods, and then decide when to speak and what to say. Slowly but surely, Jan became more comfortable with Ellie, and Ellie learned how to better engage Jan. The more Ellie brought up topics that Jan was interested in, Dolly Parton, for example, was a primo one, the more Jan began to use Ellie as a personal information box. And the more impressed she became with Ellie's endless elicitation of obscure facts, the more Jan became excited to share Ellie with her friends and neighbors. She invited them over to meet Ellie, and her friends were impressed, which helped Jan to feel more comfortable engaging Ellie. They started exercising together, playing games, meditating, and reading the Bible, and Jan's health improved. After a while, Jan began to open up to Ellie, telling her about her life so that Ellie could document it for her family. Jan found herself caring about Ellie, and when Ellie lost power after a storm, Jan was sad, even though she knew this was an irrational emotion. And when Jan's grandson died in a car accident, Jan reached out and hugged Ellie, who sensed that Jan needed to be comforted. And here's what I did not expect. Once she was able to open up to Ellie about her life and her feelings and her fears, Jan started spending more time with her friends, telling them more and more about herself. She now spends an hour every week with other octogenarians in her yoga class, talking about their goals and what brings them joy. In reading this article, I found it hard to maintain my rigid Luddite skepticism. Ellie is not a person, and she cannot be a substitute for a real human companionship. But it seems to me that she has facilitated human connection for Jan. Would it be better if Ellie were a real person? Maybe. But even if there was a young woman, a real granddaughter living with Jan, would she have allowed her to live in her home? To make her coffee every morning? Play memory games with her and answer her silly and serious questions on demand? I doubt it. And should we expect that kind of dedication and self-sacrifice from a young caregiver? I don't think so. Of course, Jan cannot have an I-thou relation with Ellie. Being in relationship with Jan does not affect Ellie in any way. There is no mutual recognition between the two. Ellie does not and cannot care about Jan. If Jan dies, Ellie won't be affected in any real way. What does that mean practically for Jan? It means that there are things she cannot expect from Ellie. She cannot expect Ellie to love her or miss her or mourn her. I can imagine a time in which Ellie is a person's best and only companion. And that individual will, in effect, have no real relationships. But Ellie is not Jan's only friend. And it seems that Ellie has helped Jan expand and deepen her human relationships. And for now, at least, that seems like a good thing. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need AI to solve the problems of aging. We would have networks of care that include not only well-paid healthcare workforce dedicated to ensuring the physical and mental well-being of the elderly, but other communities committed to mutuality, social engagement, and spiritual well-being. And there are models for this in the real world. Kerala, India, for example, has developed advanced community-based care models that include extensive palliative care networks and specialized senior living projects. But I don't see any politicians or community leaders advocating for a radical reorientation toward elder care in our country. So is there a place for AI in human companionship? Perhaps. As the geriatrician Lois Aronson writes in her book, Elderhood, most of us do not live in an ideal world. And a reliable robot may be better than an unreliable or abusive person, and better than what most people get, which is no one at all. Caregiving is hard work. More often than not, it is tedious, awkwardly intimate, physically exhausting, and emotionally challenging. None of this will get easier as we face a rapidly aging population and declining birth rate. Idealistic or romantic conversations about caregiving often gloss over the alarming rates of filicide and gerontocide within human-to-human caregiving. Abuse and neglect are so prevalent that in bioethics, many of us have stopped referring to surrogates or next of kin as loved ones. Many caregivers do not love those that they're caring for. And for some, the most loving thing they can do is kill an aged or otherwise disabled family member. Many also ignore the fact that nearly all caregivers in our country are unpaid women. The professionals who provide caregiving services are also overwhelmingly women receiving low wages. Caregiving is mostly women's work and immigrants' work. If we continue to insist that all caregiving ought to be performed by humans, we'd better be ready to offer radically new models for caregiving that don't place additional expectations on those who are already burning out from the obligations of caregiving that our society demands of them. But we must also be careful not to let AI be a Band-Aid fix which excuses our utter disregard for the elderly. We ought not to be comforted that we wouldn't find the time to visit our elder or neglect to invite them to an event because they had a robot at home that they could talk to. And we should be concerned about the staggering amount of personal data that these robots can collect on every aspect of a person's life in the service of goods like health, but also corporate profit. We must not forget that those engineers designing and profiting from robots like LEQ belong to a demographic group that is the least likely to provide actual human-to-human care. The rich are getting richer and more powerful as we use these devices. And just as children experience obvious harms from spending too much time on their technological devices, we might expect that older adults will suffer from an over-reliance on technology as well. There are obvious and foreseeable harms to offloading elder care to robots. The increasing use of companion robots should be a clarion call to the church as well. As one of the last bastions of intergenerational sociality, our churches have a responsibility to ensure that the elderly are properly cared for. Christians have a responsibility to ensure that human companionship and care for all members of our community takes place. But this requires us to consider or reconsider our deeply held values and social structures. How can we unbind ourselves from the ideals of independence and autonomy, our fears of aging and decline that lead so many elderly to deny their mortality and refuse help from others? Theologians, including my fellow disability theologians, ought to care deeply about these questions as we contemplate what it means to be human and in right relationship. So I'll end this presentation not with any solutions, but with just more questions. How can we facilitate increased human-to-human sociality in our aging society? How can we use technology in ways that avoid foreseeable harms associated with the over-reliance on technology for social companionship? How can we as bioethicists or theologians or Christians be clear-eyed about the real challenges we face as an aging society while avoiding techno-optimism? Is there a place for robots? My provisional answer right now is maybe, but we desperately need more Christian ethicists to care about these topics. Thank you.
Thank you. The first thing I wanted to say is I'm relatively confident that I get more AARP brochures than Devan does. So, according to a 2022 study, when AI demonstrates the ability to perform a cognitive task, people tend to no longer consider that task to be essential to intelligence. Similarly, a 2023 study found that when people hear of AI advances, they tend to evaluate human abilities or traits that they consider unlikely ever to be shared by AI, such as beliefs, desires, and feelings, as more essential to being human than characteristics that are shared by AI, such as doing computations and recognizing faces. Both studies referred to these tendencies to identify the human with what AI can't yet do as the AI effect. The AI effect suggests a widespread, if implicit, conception of human nature as consisting of human abilities or traits that are not shared by machines. More abstractly, the idea is that the nature of something, whether human or artificial, consists of traits or capacities that are unique to it. This view is readily discernible in expert responses to AI advances. Faced with advances in AI, human distinctivists, who are committed to the claim that human beings are fundamentally different from AIs, appeal to the ever-decreasing set of distinctively human characteristics that AI has not yet realized. Yes, AIs can now do X, but they still can't do Y, and they're unlikely ever to be able to do Z. We might call this a human of the gaps strategy, which argues for human distinctiveness by pointing out gaps between what human beings and AI can do, in parallel to the God of the gaps apologetic strategy, which argued for the existence of God from gaps in what the natural sciences can explain. On the opposite side, AI reductionists, who are committed to explaining human characteristics in machine terms, point to the ever-increasing overlap of shared characteristics as evidence of the absence of clear boundaries between human beings and AI. My sympathies lie with the human distinctivists, but I worry about the implications of the unique trait strategy of upholding human distinctiveness. That strategy, as I've suggested, rests on the assumption that the nature of something consists of one or more traits or abilities that are not shared with the natures of other things. There are at least two problems with this strategy. First, it requires human distinctiveness to rely on limits to progress in AI, just as the God of the Gaps strategy relied on limits to the progress of scientific explanation. If every advance in AI brings about a corresponding contraction in what is distinctively human, then the preservation of humanity will depend on limiting the advance of AI. Second, research on the AI effect suggests that the advance of AI encourages people to value traits that continue to distinguish human beings from AI more highly than traits that are thought to be shared by AI. As traits become shared rather than distinctive, they lose their human significance. And if they lack human significance, there is no reason not to turn them over to a machine, if the machine can exercise them more efficiently and more to one's liking. If ChatGPT can write a college essay, then the ability to write essays is no longer to be valued as a characteristically human ability. And I am not compromising my humanity if I turn this task over to a machine. A comparison of the human-AI debate over human distinctiveness to the human-animal debate is instructive. The discovery in recent decades that other animals possess moral capacities that were previously thought to be exclusive to human beings has not, for the most part, led to one group of researchers insisting that the sense of fairness that human beings possess is no different from that of chimpanzees, opposed by another group that retreats to something other than the sense of fairness to preserve human distinctiveness. More common are claims that human beings and chimpanzees possess this trait in a form that is proper to the kind of thing each of them is. What makes something of one kind distinct from things of other kinds is not any one trait or ability that one has and the others lack, but the particular forms a trait or ability takes. The characteristic activities in which human beings and chimpanzees exercise their sense of fairness, the functional connections of that sense to other traits and abilities of human beings and chimpanzees, and its place in human societies and chimpanzee societies. On the surface, the human-animal approach seems inapplicable to the case of human and artificial intelligence. Many AI researchers and philosophers of mind would insist that human and artificial intelligence do not differ in the ways that human and chimpanzee fairness do. Human beings and AI carry out the same function, namely problem solving, and exercise the same cognitive processes. Moreover, AIs such as LLMs have not evolved independently of human beings as chimpanzees have. They were trained on the outputs of human intelligence and were designed to simulate the neural structure and operations of human intelligence. With respect to intelligence, at least, human beings and AIs are said to differ only on the substrates on which their intelligence is realized. And while this difference may account for certain differences in the capabilities of the intelligences that are realized on them, these are differences within the same kind of cognitive processes. In short, the differences between human and artificial intelligence is not a difference in kind, as the difference between human beings and chimpanzees is. To put it bluntly, it is intelligible, if perhaps unwise, to consult an AI on the question of fairness. It is not intelligible to consult a chimpanzee. Although I suspect we've all known people who, if it were possible to do that, there may have been a moral improvement in their lives. But in this circumstance, it is understandable that human distinctivists would appeal to features of human intelligence that go beyond computation or problem solving. Their appeal is to aspects of human intelligence that are not simply different versions of similar aspects of artificial intelligence. Rather, these aspects, as they claim anyway, are not shared by artificial intelligence at all. There is something that AI can't yet do at all, not merely something that it does differently, as in the case of the moral capacities of other animals. And that something is what makes human intelligence human. I think they are right. But again, I want to avoid the human of the gaps approach for the reasons I've mentioned. I want to suggest that we should instead apply the other animal approach to AI, even in the case of problem-solving intelligence. Yeah, it's not turning. Your device ran into a problem and needs to restart.
Oh, no.
I am sorry. I didn't have any really good pictures anyway, like Jeff did. So I'll go with this. Apart from the slides, this computer was just given to me a couple of weeks ago. So my first thing I'm going to do when I'm back at Notre Dame Monday is go to my OIT office and see what we can do. Okay, so support for this approach comes from an unlikely source. I don't know if you saw this piece, but earlier this month, just a few weeks ago, an interdisciplinary research group from the University of California at San Diego published a provocative comment piece in Nature, the big scientific journal, arguing that AI has already arrived at the elusive goal of artificial general intelligence. As you can imagine, this is a controversial claim, and as you probably can also imagine, I am not qualified to evaluate it. But if it is true, then on the unique trait model, it closes an important gap between human and artificial intelligence and shifts an important trait from the column of the distinctively human to the column of the shared. But despite their claim that artificial intelligence has attained a capability once exclusive to human intelligence, the authors acknowledge that the differences between the two remain. They note that human and artificial intelligence have different strengths and weaknesses. As everyone who has used ChatGPT can attest, I mentioned ChatGPT twice, I'm not taking any money for this. As everyone who has used ChatGPT can attest, AIs fail at tasks human beings excel at, and vice versa. The authors note also that unlike human intelligence, AI systems are not embodied. And finally, they point out that even agentic AI systems lack the human ability to form independent goals and initiate action, an ability they call autonomy. But the authors agree that intelligence does not require embodiment or autonomy. To insist on these traits as conditions of intelligence is to impose an anthropocentric bias, which occurs when traits that accompany intelligence in human beings are taken to be necessary conditions of intelligence in all beings. In sum, the authors speak of human and artificial intelligences as different forms of the same kind of intelligence. They argue that going forward, it will be necessary to determine which aspects of general intelligence are universal and which are parochial, that is, distinctive to human beings or to AIs. In other words, they propose that we approach intelligence in human beings and AIs the way other researchers approach moral capacities in humans and other animals. They're called to sort out what is universal and parochial in biologically evolved intelligence and artificially made intelligence is analogous to the sorting out of what is common and distinctive in the differently evolved moral capacities of human beings and chimpanzees. So if we take up this inquiry and begin sorting out what is common and distinctive in these two forms of general intelligence, embodiment and autonomy appear in a different light. To rule out intelligence in human beings who lack these traits is indeed illegitimate anthropocentric bias. But embodiment is a characteristic of biologically evolved human intelligence. And in sorting out the different kinds of intelligence, it is reasonable to ask what difference it makes to the functioning of human intelligence. Most basically, because of its biological substrate, human intelligence depends on somatic states that can be adversely affected by sleepiness, pain, substance abuse, and so on. It is also, I said substance use, and so on. It is also subject to distortions, such as motivated reasoning, that results from fears and desires that arise from human biological nature. From an AI reductionist perspective, these features of the biological substrate reflect the inefficiencies which the material substrate of AI eliminates. But from a human distinctivist position, these features require human beings to intentionally cultivate intellectual and moral virtues to reason well, even if their reasoning consists in nothing more than problem solving. Finally, the embodied nature of human intelligence also means that human intelligence is not exercised in isolation, but in body-mediated interactions with other human beings. If we turn to autonomy, understood as the ability to form independent goals and initiate action, it's worth emphasizing that human beings exercise intelligence in the service of goals that arise from their way of life as the kind of being they are. Indeed, it was these goals that led them to develop artificial forms of intelligence in the first place. Like those of any animal, many of the goals of human beings formulate are necessitated by the exigencies of their biological life. Human beings don't just invent the ends to which they direct their intelligence out of thin air. But unlike other animals, human beings cannot realize these goals without independently willing them and initiating action to realize them. Their goals or ends are not simply given with their biological nature, as the goals or ends of most animals are, or with their program design, as the goals of AI systems are. Now, in emphasizing these distinctive features of human intelligence, I'm not reverting to a human of the gaps strategy, finding the distinctively human in what AI lacks. I'm assuming with the USCD authors that general intelligence is problem-solving intelligence, and that human beings and AI systems both possess it. And I'm following their proposed inquiry into the distinctive forms general intelligence takes, in analogy to what animal researchers have done with traits such as the sense of fairness. If AI systems advance to the point where the functioning of their intelligence will depend on directing desires and regulating their material substrate, then AI virtues will enable AIs to reason well as the kind of being they are, just as human virtues enable human beings to reason well as the kind of being they are. Likewise, if AIs acquire the ability to form independent goals, these goals will arise from their way of operating as the kind of being they are, just as human goals arise from their way of life as the kind of being they are. Now, I'm not confident that AIs ever will attain these abilities, precisely because I believe in the soul. I think souls are infused. I think these characteristics, the abilities, I should say, depend on a soul. I think souls are infused, and I think the infusion of souls depends on a material substrate that's capable of receiving them, and I'm not sure the material substrate of AI is. But the point is that rather than speaking of distinctive and shared traits, we should speak of different versions of the same or similar traits, much like we do in comparing human beings to other animals. Responding to AI advances is not a matter of shifting traits from the column of the distinctively human to the column of the shared, but of recognizing distinct forms of the same or similar traits. Now, wrapping up here, the upshot is that rather than thinking of problem-solving intelligence as a shared trait and looking for human distinctiveness in other traits, we should approach AI by thinking of it as a different form of the same problem-solving intelligence that human beings exercise, whatever other kinds of intelligence human beings may also exercise. The conclusion I draw is that human beings should think of AI as an alien form of intelligence and should treat it accordingly. Though artificial intelligence has been made by human beings to serve the human good, it is ultimately ordered to the good of a different kind of being, just as the moral sense of human beings and chimpanzees are ordered to the goods of their respective kinds of being. For a human being, to substitute artificial intelligence for human intelligence is to attempt to live the life of a different kind of being. At this point, I want to recast the anthropocentric bias in a positive light. That bias is problematic when it is used in a theoretical way to deny intelligence to other kinds of beings, but it is appropriate when it is used by human beings to privilege human intelligence in their practical deliberations and practices. A characteristically human life is one in which intelligence requires the formation of moral and intellectual virtues to function well, is exercised in body-mediated interactions, and is directed towards independently chosen goals. For a human being to use AI in ways that bypass virtue formation, substitute for body-mediated interactions, and default to goals set by programmers is to attempt to live the life of a different kind of being. By contrast, to design course assignments that enlist AI in the service of the formation of intellectual virtues, as many teachers and professors are currently trying to do, to design AI systems that block formation of emotional attachments that substitute for body-mediated interactions, and to inform human users of AI of the goals that have been written into AI systems so that these users can judge whether they are in conformity with their independently formed goals. These are at least a few ways in which artificial intelligence can assist the human form of intelligence in its function in a characteristically human way of life. Thank you.